The rain hit the pavement like bullets, and Joseph Patterson stood at the edge of everything he'd ever fought for, holding a crumpled $20 bill that could either save his daughter's life or strangers, but not both. What he didn't know was that the shivering woman in the tattered pink dress wasn't a stranger at all. She was a missing piece to a conspiracy that had already destroyed his life, and his choice in the next 60 seconds would either condemn them both or unleash a reckoning that would shake the city's elite to their core. Before we continue, please tell us where in the world you're watching from. We love seeing how far our stories travel, and it proves that powerful stories resonate everywhere. The fluorescent lights in the security office buzz like dying insects, casting sickly shadows across Silas Vane's face as he slid the termination papers across the desk. Joseph stared at the documents, his vision blurring at the edges, trying to comprehend how 23 months of perfect service records could be erased by a single night. Sleeping on duty is a serious offense, Patterson, Silas said, his voice smooth as polished marble and twice as cold. The camera footage doesn't lie. Joseph's jaw tightened. That footage is doctored. I was doing my rounds on the executive floor when you should have been monitoring the loading dock entrance. Silas leaned back in his leather chair, a predator savoring the kill, where, coincidentally, we had a security breach. Sensitive materials were stolen. The board wants someone's head, and frankly, you're the logical choice. The words hit Joseph like physical blows. He thought about Lily, asleep in their one-bedroom apartment 3 bus transfers away, her inhaler on the nightstand running dangerously low. He thought about the rent due in 5 days, the notices from the school about her field trip deposit, the way she still smiled at him every morning despite the cereal being the same store-brand flakes they'd eaten for 6 months straight. I have a daughter, Joseph said, hating the pleading edge that crept into his voice. I need this job. I've never been late, never called in sick, never. Then you should have stayed awake. Silas stood, buttoning his designer suit jacket with deliberate precision. Security will escort you out. You have 10 minutes to clear your locker. And Patterson? Don't bother using me as a reference. The negligence clause means you're unhireable in this sector. The walk through the building was a perp walk without handcuffs. Marcus, the junior guard who'd always borrowed cigarettes from Joseph, wouldn't meet his eyes. The reception staff suddenly found their computer screens fascinating. By the time Joseph stepped into the February rain with his work boots and extra uniform in a cardboard box, he felt like a ghost haunting his own life. The bus ride home stretched into eternity. Joseph watched the city lights streak past, each one representing someone with a job, a purpose, a future. He pulled out his wallet and counted the contents. One $20 bill, 3 singles, and a handful of coins. $23.47 between his family and the abyss. Lily was still asleep when he arrived home, her small body curled under the donated quilt from the church charity drive. Joseph sat on the edge of her bed, watching her breathe, each exhalation a reminder of the inhaler they'd need to refill in 2 days. The prescription cost $35. He'd been planning to use his paycheck, the one that would never come now, to cover it. He couldn't sleep. At 4 a.m., he gave up trying and made instant coffee with water he'd reheated 3 times to save electricity. The termination papers lay on their folding table like an accusation. Negligence resulting in security breach. The words would follow him to every interview, every background check, every opportunity to crawl back to minimum wage. But it was the other detail that gnawed at him, the one Silas had mentioned almost as an afterthought. A security breach on the executive floor. Joseph had been doing his rounds that night, had seen the service elevator doors open when they should have been locked, had started to investigate when his radio crackled with Silas's voice ordering him to the loading dock immediately for a priority situation that turned out to be nothing. By the time he'd returned to the executive floor, everything was quiet, too quiet, and the next morning he'd been summoned to Silas's office with accusations of sleeping on duty and camera footage he'd never seen. "Daddy?" Lily's voice pulled him from his thoughts. She stood in the doorway in her 2 small pajamas, rubbing her eyes. "Why are you home? Don't you have work?" Joseph forced a smile, the kind that probably didn't reach his eyes but was the best he could manage. "Schedule change, sweetheart. I get to have breakfast with you today." Her face lit up in a way that made his chest ache. Really? Can we have the good cereal? They didn't have the good cereal. They had the store-brand flakes and the last of the milk that was a day past its expiration date. But Lily ate like it was a feast, chattering about her upcoming spelling test and how her friend Emma had invited her to a birthday party next weekend that required a present they couldn't afford. After Lily left for school, Joseph spent the day filling out online applications, each one requiring him to explain his termination. By noon, he'd received 3 auto-rejections. By 3 p.m., he'd pawned his watch, the one his father had given before dying, for $45 that would cover Lily's inhaler and buy them another week of groceries. He picked Lily up from school and took her to the park, pushing her on the swings until his arms ached because it was free and she laughed. And he needed to hear that sound before the world closed in completely. As sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, they walked home past the downtown high-rises where people in expensive clothes hurried to expensive cars. That's when the rain started, and that's when he saw her. She was standing in the alley between 5th and 6th, pressed against the brick wall like she was trying to disappear into it. The pink dress, probably expensive once, was tore at the hem and streaked with dirt. Her feet were bare, bloodied. Her hair plastered her face by the rain. But it was her eyes that stopped Joseph cold, not the helplessness of addiction or the vacant stare of mental illness he'd seen on 100 street corners. This was purer, primal terror. "Daddy, that lady doesn't have shoes," Lily whispered, tugging his hand. The woman's gaze snapped at them, and for a moment, Joseph saw her calculate whether they were a threat. Her body tense like she was preparing to run despite the obvious pain it would cause. "It's okay," Joseph said softly, the same voice he'd used calming Lily after nightmares. "We're not going to hurt you." The woman's laugh was bitter, broken. "Everyone hurts everyone. It's just a matter of when." Joseph should have kept walking. He had $23.47 minus the $7 he'd spent on Lily's after-school snack. He had $16.47 between his daughter and disaster, and getting involved in someone else's catastrophe was the kind of mistake people like him couldn't afford. But Lily was watching him with those eyes that still believed daddies could fix things. And the woman was shivering so hard her teeth chattered. "There's a diner on the corner," Joseph heard himself say. "Let me buy you something hot to eat." The woman's eyes widened. Why? It was a good question. Joseph didn't have a good answer except that 20 years ago, he'd been a kid sleeping in his car after his mom died and his dad drank away the rent money. And a security guard named Mr. Chin had bought him dinner and told him that dignity wasn't something you earned. It was something you gave. "Because you're cold," Joseph said simply. "And I've been cold." The diner's harsh fluorescent lights revealed more than Joseph wanted to see. The woman's wrists were raw with rope burns. A bruise the size of a fist darkened her left cheekbone. She ordered the cheapest item on the menu, soup, and when it arrived, her hand shook so badly she could barely hold the spoon. Lily, who'd inherited her father's inability to ignore suffering, pushed her grilled cheese across the table. "You can have half. Daddy always makes me share." Something in the woman's carefully constructed armor cracked. A single tear tracked through the grime on her face. "Thank you," she whispered. While she ate, Joseph excused himself to the convenience store next door, spending his last $20 on a cheap blanket, a bottle of water, and a pair of flip-flops that would at least protect her feet from the glass and needles that littered the downtown streets. When he returned, the woman was staring at Lily with an expression of such profound loss that Joseph's protective instincts flared. But then she looked up at him, and he saw something else. Determination. "I can't pay you back," she said flatly. "Not tonight. Maybe not ever. I'm not asking you to." Joseph set the items on the table. "But I need to get my daughter home. There's a shelter on Morrison Street. They'll have a bed." "No shelters." The words came out sharp, panicked. "They'll find me. They'll—" She glanced at Lily and swallowed the rest of the sentence. Joseph knew he should walk away. Instead, he pulled out the last $3 from his wallet and slid them across the table along with a napkin where he'd written the address of a church that ran a soup kitchen. "Father Miguel doesn't ask questions. Tell him Joseph Patterson sent you." The woman stared at the napkin like it was a lifeline thrown across impossible distance. "Joseph Patterson," she repeated. "I won't forget." In the morning, Joseph woke to screaming. Not Lily's screams, engine screams. The throaty roar of Italian supercars that didn't belong within 10 blocks of his neighborhood. He stumbled to the window, still half asleep, and felt his brain short-circuit. 6 Ferraris, 3 red, 2 black, 1 midnight blue, lined the street like a presidential motorcade. Neighbors poured onto their porches. Mrs. Chun from upstairs was filming on her phone. And stepping out of the lead car, transformed by a tailored black suit and carrying herself like she owned the city, was the woman from the alley. Joseph's door buzzed. Then someone knocked. Then, when he still stood frozen, a voice called out, "Mr. Patterson, I believe we have unfinished business." He opened the door in his worn pajama pants and faded t-shirt, suddenly aware that he hadn't shaved in 3 days and probably smelled like desperation and instant coffee. The woman smiled, and it was like watching the sun rise. "May I come in?" "Daddy, there are Ferraris outside." Lily crashed into the room, her eyes wide as saucers. "Are they here for us?" In a manner of speaking, the woman crouched down to Lily's level with practiced ease. "I'm Jean. Your father saved my life last night. I came to say thank you. With 6 cars." Lily's voice hit a pitch that probably annoyed dogs in the next county. "Well, I want to make sure he noticed." Jean stood, and her smile faded as she met Joseph's eyes. "Mr. Patterson, do you remember the security breach at your former workplace? The one that cost you your job?" Joseph's mouth went dry. "How do you know about that?" "Because I was the breach." Jean walked to a window, gazing out at the gathering crowd with an expression that mixed fury and calculation. "My name is Jean Castellane. I'm the CEO of Castellane Technologies. 4 days ago, I was kidnapped from my office on the executive floor of the Patterson Global building where my company leases space. The same night you were fired." The room tilted. Joseph gripped the back of his couch to stay upright. "That's impossible. There was nothing on the news about. Because the people who took me control the narrative." Jean's voice dropped to something cold and lethal. "My CFO, Richard Castellane, my ex-husband, orchestrated the kidnapping with the help of your supervisor, Silas Vane. They're attempting a hostile takeover of my company while I'm missing. They needed me gone, and they needed anyone who might have seen something gone as well." Joseph was the only guard who couldn't be bought. A new voice said from the doorway. A woman in a sharp suit and carried herself like a coiled spring stepped inside. "I'm Dana Chun, Ms. Castellane's head of security. We've been investigating conspiracy for 6 months. We finally traced a leak to Silas Vane, but by the time we realized he'd moved against Ms. Castellane, she'd vanished. I managed to escape 2 nights ago," Jean continued. "I spent the next day evading capture, hence the condition you found me in. My credit card were frozen. My phone tracked every ally potentially compromised. I was running out of options when you appeared." Lily tugged Joseph's hand. "Daddy, did you really save a CEO?" "I just bought her soup," Joseph muttered, his mind still trying to catch up. "You did more than that." Jean pulled a phone from her pocket and brought up a video. It showed Joseph and Lily at the diner, the moment Lily had shared her sandwich. "My security team has been tracking me. They saw this interaction. Do you know what Dana said when she watched it?" Dana smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. "I said, that man has no idea who she is, and he spent his last dollars on her anyway. And then I said, that's the man we need." "Need for what?" Joseph's protective instincts were screaming. This was too big, too dangerous, too far from his world of time clocks and security checkpoints. "To help me take my company back." Jean's voice rang with absolute conviction. "You know the building. You know the security systems. More importantly, you're the only person involved who can't be bribed or blackmailed because you've already lost everything they can take." "I have a daughter," Joseph said flatly. "I'm not risking her in some corporate war." "You're already in the war, Mr. Patterson." Dana pulled up another screen. Joseph's employment record, flagged with red marks. "Silas Vane made sure you're unhireable in any security capacity. He's also filed false police reports alleging you stole from the company. If we don't stop him, you'll be fighting those allegations for years while trying to feed your daughter on under-the-table work that doesn't check backgrounds. The trap closed around Joseph like a vice. What do you want from me? Jean's expression softened. The same thing you gave me in that alley. A chance to survive. Listen, if you've made it this far in the story, you're invested. You want to know what happens next. But here's the thing. Most people scroll past these stories without subscribing. They watch, they enjoy, and they disappear. If this story matters to you, if you actually care how it ends, hit that subscribe button, please. It takes 2 seconds. And if you don't, you'll probably forget about this channel and never hear any other amazing stories from me. The war room occupied the penthouse of a building Joseph couldn't have afforded a cup of coffee in yesterday. Wall-sized screens displayed security footage, financial records, email trails that laid bare the conspiracy in brutal detail. Silas Vane and Richard Castellane had been planning the takeover for 11 months, carefully positioning allies on the board, funneling company resources into offshore accounts, and building a narrative that Jean was mentally unstable and unfit to lead. They needed me gone, but not dead. Initially, Jean explained, pointer in hand like a general planning an invasion. A dead CEO triggers investigations, succession plans, insurance payouts. But a kidnapped CEO who's held for 2 weeks, who appears to suffer a psychotic break, on camera before being rescued by her concerned ex-husband. That a tragedy the board can fix with an emergency vote to remove me for medical reasons. Joseph studied the security footage from the night of the kidnapping. There, at 11:47 p.m., he saw himself walking the executive floor hallway. 3 minutes later, Silas's voice crackled over his radio, ordering him to the loading dock for a priority situation. At 11:53, 2 men in maintenance uniforms entered Jean's office. At 12:07, they left with a large equipment case. "That's you in the case," Joseph said, feeling sick, sedated and folded like luggage. Jean's voice held no emotion, but her hands were white-knuckled around the pointer. "They held me in a warehouse in the industrial district. My head of security found me because I managed to scratch a distress code into the bathroom mirror using a belt buckle. But by the time Dana's team raided the location, Richard had already filed the paperwork to have me declared incompetent. Dana pulled up a legal document. The board votes in 3 days. If we don't prove a conspiracy by then, Richard takes control and Ms. Castellane loses everything. Her company, her reputation, and quite possibly her freedom when they have her committed to a psychiatric facility. So we need evidence," Joseph said, "something that directly ties Silas and Richard to the kidnapping." "The evidence exists," Jean confirmed. "Email correspondence, financial transfers, security footage from the warehouse. But it's all stored on Silas Vane's private server inside the Patterson Global building. Specifically, in his office on the executive floor." Joseph saw where this was going and didn't like it. "You want me to break into the building and hack his computer. We want you to walk into the building and access his computer," Dana corrected. "Silas was sloppy in one crucial way. He never formally processed your termination paperwork through HR. According to the system, you're still employed. Your security badge still works. For how long? Until Silas realizes his mistake. Could be hours, could be days." Dana slid a small device across the table. "This is a data clone. Plug it into his computer. It automatically copies everything, and we'll have our evidence. 10 minutes in and out." Joseph picked up the device, feeling the weight of decision that would either save his life or end it. "And if I get caught?" "Then Silas files the charges he's already threatened, and you go to prison for corporate espionage." Jean's honesty was brutal but oddly comforting. "I won't lie to you, Mr. Patterson. This is dangerous. You'd be well within your rights to walk away." Lily's voice echoed in Joseph's memory. "Daddy, did you really save a CEO?" And his own voice, much younger, asking Mr. Chin why he'd helped a stupid kid who'd screwed up his life. "Because someone helped me once, and I'm still paying it forward." "When do we start?" Joseph asked. The Patterson Global building looked the same as it had 48 hours ago, but now Joseph approached it as an enemy fortress. Dana had briefed him on the updated security protocols. the rotation schedules, the blind spots in the camera coverage that he'd helped identify months ago when he'd still believe he was protecting something honorable. His badge beeped green at the employee entrance. First hurdle cleared. Marcus was at the security desk, his head down over his phone, barely glancing up as Joseph signed a visitor log with a scribbled signature that could have been anyone's. The elevator to the executive floor required a secondary badge scan. Joseph's hands were sweating as he pressed his badge to the reader. 5 seconds that felt like 5 years. Then, beep, green light. The door slid open. The executive floor was quiet at 9 p.m., most offices dark, but light spilled from under Silas's door. Joseph froze, heart hammering. Dana's voice crackled in the nearly invisible earpiece she'd given him. Vane left the building at 8:47. That's his smart lighting. It's on a timer. Joseph tried the door. Locked. But he'd learned from Mr. Chen that most office locks were designed to keep out the honest, not the determined. He pulled out the bypass key Dana had provided, a sophisticated piece of lock-picking technology disguised as a pen, and had the door open in 15 seconds. Silas's office smelled like expensive cologne and corruption. Joseph moved the computer, noting the paranoid details. A privacy screen, a keyboard with nowhere patterns that might reveal passwords, a webcam with a physical cover. This was a man who understood operational security. But he'd underestimated the security guard he destroyed. Joseph plugged in the data clone. The device hummed softly, a progress bar appearing on the screen. 7 minutes estimated. He forced himself to breathe, to think like the guard he'd been instead of the desperate man he'd become. What would he have done if he'd caught someone in this office? Checked the floor directory to verify they belonged here. Called the supervisor, in this case Silas himself. Patterson, you've got company. Dana's voice held an edge of panic. Marcus just called Silas. He checked the entry log and saw your signature. How long do I have? Silas is 10 minutes out, but he's sending Marcus up now. The progress bar showed 3 minutes remaining. Joseph scanned the office for options. He could hide in the closet, but that was a temporary solution. He could run, but without the data, this was all for nothing. Or he could do what he did best. Be a security guard. Joseph unplugged the data clone with 30 seconds remaining. Praying it was enough, he slipped it into his pocket, relocked Silas's office, and positioned himself in the hallway with his phone to his ear, pretending to be in the middle of a conversation. Marcus stepped off the elevator with his hand on his baton. Patterson? What the hell are you doing here? Joseph kept his voice casual. Retrieving some personal items from my locker. Didn't realize I needed an escort. Your badge was deactivated. Marcus's confusion was genuine. How did you even get up here? Did you deactivate it, or did Silas say he would? Joseph watched Marcus's face cycle through realization. Let me guess. He told you he'd handle the paperwork, but he never actually did it because he needed to keep me listed as active in case someone started asking questions about the security breach. The elevator dinged. Silas Vane stepped out, his expensive suit rumpled, his usually controlled expression twisted with fury. Patterson, you're trespassing. Marcus, call the police. Am I? Joseph held up his badge. According to your own security system, I'm still employed. One explained to the cops why you've been letting an unauthorized person access the building for 2 days. Silas's eyes narrowed. What did you take? My dignity, mostly. Joseph started walking toward the elevator, forcing his body language to stay relaxed despite every instinct screaming at him to run. And the knowledge that you're sloppy, Vane. You made me the fall guy for something big, but you left loose ends. Marcus, detain him. Silas's voice cracked with barely controlled rage. But Marcus hesitated, his hand still on his baton, but not drawing it. Joseph had worked alongside him for 18 months. Had covered his shifts when his kid was sick, had never once thrown him under the bus when Marcus made mistakes. That currency spent itself now in the form of a young guard who looked between his supervisor and his former colleague and chose to believe the wrong person. Let him go, Marcus said quietly. If he's still in the system, he's got a right to his locker. Joseph didn't wait for Silas to countermand the order. He walked into the elevator, pressed a button for ground floor, and met Silas's eyes as the doors closed. See you around, Vane. The ride down felt like falling. Joseph's hands shook as he pulled out the data clone. The progress bar showed 94% complete. Not everything, but Dana had said anything over 75% would give them enough to work with. He exited through the loading dock, the same route Jean had been taken, and climbed into the waiting car, where Dana sat at the wheel looking like she'd aged 5 years in 10 minutes. "Please tell me you got it," she said. Joseph handed her the device. 94%. "And I just made an enemy who won't stop until I'm destroyed. Then we'd better destroy him first." Dana pulled into traffic with the cold efficiency of someone who'd done this before. "Welcome to the war, Patterson." The evidence was devastating. Emails detailing the kidnapping logistics. Financial transfers totaling $8 million from Castellane Technologies accounts to offshore entities controlled by Richard Castellane. Security footage from the warehouse showing Jean in captivity, with Silas Vane visible in 2 frames visiting to check on the package. But evidence wasn't enough. Richard had spent months positioning his allies on the board, spreading whispers about Jean's instability, building a narrative that made her the problem. They needed something theatrical, undeniable, and perfectly timed. "The annual gala," Jean said, her eyes bright with the kind of dangerous thinking that built empires. 300 people, including every board member. Open bar, speeches, and the traditional announcement of next year's strategic initiatives. Richard will be there, playing concerned ex-husband. "We make our move then." Joseph shook his head. "That's too public. Too many civilians." "That's exactly why it's perfect." Jean pulled up the gala's floor plan. The Patterson Global building has a central atrium where the event is held. The security office overlooks it from the mezzanine level. If we broadcast the evidence on the main screens during Richard's speech, every witness in the city will watch him implode in real time. "And Silas will have a security team there," Dana added. "But they'll be focused on protecting the guests, not the A/V system. If Patterson can access the security office and patch our evidence into the presentation feed, we can hijack the whole event." Joseph studied the floor plan, his security guard instincts mapping the approach. "I'll need a uniform, and a convincing story for why I'm in security office instead of working floor." "Leave that to me," Jean said. The night of the gala, Joseph stood in a borrowed security uniform that fit perfectly because Dana had somehow acquired his exact measurements. His badge, a sophisticated forgery that would pass any scanner, identified him as James Patterson, a contractor hired to supplement the regular security team for the high-profile event. The atrium glittered with crystallized wealth. Diamond necklaces that cost more than Joseph's annual salary adorned necks, craned to view the ice sculptures. Waiters circulated with champagne that probably cost $50 a glass. And at the center of it all, Richard Castellane held court like a king at his coronation. "He looks confident," Dana observed through Joseph's earpiece. She was positioned in a van 2 blocks away, ready to feed the evidence files once Joseph established a connection. Confident men make mistakes. Joseph moved through the crowd toward the service stairs, his eyes tracking the security team's positions. Marcus was there, working a side door, still looking uncomfortable in his uniform. At least 3 other guards Joseph recognized from his time at Patterson Global, all looking bored and underpaid. The security office was on the mezzanine level, accessible by a staircase marked "Authorized Personnel Only." Joseph climbed with purpose, the kind of body language that said he belonged there, and pushed through the door into the nerve center of the building's security system. 2 guards sat at the monitoring stations. Joseph recognized one. Curtis, a 20-year veteran who taught him how to properly log incidents during his first week. "Patterson?" Curtis's eyebrows shot up. "I heard you got canned." "Contract work." Joseph held up his forge badge. "They needed extra bodies for the gala. You know how it is." Curtis snorted. "Do I ever? This fancy party probably costs more than my yearly salary. You covering a station? Suppose to monitor the A/V system. Make sure nobody crashes a presentation with porn or political manifestos." Joseph gestured the control panel that fed the atrium's massive display screens. "Mind if I patch in?" "Knock yourself out. I'll be in the break room if you need me." This champagne-sipping crowd isn't exactly high threat, As soon as Curtis left, Joseph connected Dana's encrypted drive to the A/V system. "I'm in. Ready when you are." "Stand by." Dana said. "Richard's about to give his speech. We want him comfortable, confident, right before we pull the rug out." Joseph watched the atrium screens as Richard took the stage, his silver hair and tailored tuxedo projecting exactly the kind of sophisticated authority that made people trust him with billions of dollars. The crowd quieted. Champagne glasses paused halfway to lips. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight to celebrate another year of unprecedented growth." Richard's voice oozed practice charm. "As many of you know, Castellane Technologies has faced challenges recently with the tragic disappearance of my ex-wife, Jean. I want to assure you all that the company remains in stable hands, and the board has taken decisive action to ensure continuity of leadership during this difficult time. Now," Dana said in Joseph's ear. Joseph pressed a button. The screens flickered. Richard's face was replaced by an email header. From Art Castellane at CastellaneTech.com to S.Vane at PattersonGlobal.com. Subject: the Jean problem. The crowd's murmur started as confusion and escalated to alarm as the email content appeared, each line more damning than the last. "Package acquired and stored at location Delta. Suggests we maintain 24-hour security until the board vote. Once I'm installed as CEO, we can negotiate her permanent retirement." Richard's face drained of color. He spun toward the screens, his mouth opening and closing like a fish drowning in air. "This is a fabrication. Someone is trying to—" The next slide appeared. A bank transfer record showing $8 million moving from Castellane Technologies to an offshore account registered to Richard Castellane. Then security footage from the warehouse, grainy but unmistakable, showing Jean sedated and bound while Silas Vane stood over her checking his watch. The crowd erupted. Phones appeared, everyone filming, tweeting, documenting. Richard tried to run, but the doors were blocked by Dana's team, actual security professionals who'd been waiting for this moment. And walking to the crowd with the poise of a queen reclaiming her throne came Jean, alive and furious and absolutely in control. "Hello, Richard," she said, her voice amplified by the atrium's acoustics. "I believe you were expecting me to stay disappeared." Joseph's earpiece crackled with panic. "Patterson, Silas is coming up the service stairs. He knows you're there." Joseph had maybe 30 seconds. He backed away from the control panel toward the office's second exit, the one that led to the maintenance corridors. But Silas burst through the main door first, his face contorted with rage and something worse, desperation. "You should have stayed down, Patterson." Silas pulled a gun from his jacket, and suddenly the corporate espionage thriller became a hostage situation. "You were a nobody. I gave you an easy out. Why couldn't you just disappear?" "Because that's not how security guards work." Joseph kept his voice calm, his hands visible. "We watch, we remember, and we protect." "Protect who?" Silas laughed, a jagged sound. "The billionaire who will forget your name tomorrow? The company that'll replace you before your body's cold? Wake up, Patterson. Nobody cares about people like us." "You're wrong." Joseph thought about Mr. Chan, who'd cared enough to feed a desperate kid. About Lily, who still believed daddies could fix the world. About Jean, who trusted a stranger with her last chance at survival. Caring is the only thing that makes any of this matter. Touching. Now step away from that computer before I... The door burst open and Dana entered with 3 armed security personnel, their weapons trained on Silas with professional precision. "Put the gun down, Vane. You're done." Silas's gun wavered between Joseph and Dana, his eyes darting like a cornered animal calculating impossible odds. Then, slowly, he lowered the weapon and kicked it away. "This doesn't change anything. You think one corporate scandal matters? There are 100 Richard Castellanes out there, 1,000 Silas Vanes. The system protects people like us." "Maybe," Joseph said, "but tonight, the system protected the right person." 3 months later, Joseph stood in front of a mirror adjusting a tie that cost more than his previous month's rent. The charges against him had been dropped, his record expunged, and he'd been offered a position as Castellane Technologies head of special security operations, a title Gene had invented specifically for him that basically meant the person who makes sure we never get betrayed again. Lily burst into his bedroom wearing a flower print dress she'd picked out herself and carrying a handful of wildflowers. "Daddy, Gene says we're going to be late to your own party." "It's not my party, sweetheart. It's a company celebration." Joseph crouched down, straightening the flowers in her grip. "And maybe we can talk about you calling her Jean instead of Miss Castellane, like we discussed?" "She told me to call her Jean." Lily's grin was mischievous. "She said Miss Castellane makes her feel old." "Does she now?" Jean appeared in the doorway, breathtaking in a green dress that probably cost more than Joseph's car used to be worth before he traded it for something that didn't require a prayer every morning to start. "I also said she could call me Mom if she wanted to, but we're taking that at her pace." Lily launched herself at Jean with the fearlessness of a child who never doubted she deserved love. Jean caught her easily, and the sight of them together, this impossible family cobbled together from catastrophe, made Joseph's throat tight. "You ready for this?" Jean asked over Lily's head, her eyes finding Joseph's with the kind of understanding that came from surviving the same war. "Ready for what?" "A fancy party where I don't know which fork to use." "Ready for the life that comes after survival." Jean set Lily down gently and crossed to Joseph, her hand finding his with the same trust she'd shown that night in the rain when she let a stranger spend his last $20 on her humanity. "Richard and Silas are awaiting trial. The board has been cleaned of conspirators. Castellane Technologies is more profitable than ever, and I have something to ask you." She pulled a small box from her clutch purse. Inside was a ring, not flashy, not ostentatious, but perfect. "I know we did this backward. I know you saved me before we even had a first date. I know I'm proposing to you at my own company party, which is probably some kind of CEO power move that would make a therapist concerned. But Joseph Patterson, will you marry me and let me spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the faith you showed a stranger in the rain?" Lily gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "Daddy, say yes." Joseph looked at the ring, at Jean's hopeful face, at Lily practically vibrating with excitement. He thought about the man he'd been 3 months ago, counting his last dollars and believing good guys finish last. He thought about Mr. Chun and the faith that compounded across generations. He thought about the choice he'd made to spend $20 on a shivering woman instead of keeping it safe, and how that choice had saved them both. "Yes," he said, and Jean's smile could have lit the city. "But I'm not taking your last name. Patterson is a good name. It was good enough for my father, and it'll be good enough for Lily." "Then I'll take yours." Jean slipped the ring on his finger. "Jean Patterson has a nice ring to it. Get it? Ring to it." Lily giggled at her own joke, and they were laughing, all three of them, in this bedroom that used to be cramped and desperate and was now just home. At the party, surrounded by people who'd once ignored him and now treated him with careful respect. Joseph found himself on the balcony overlooking the city. The Patterson Global building was visible in the distance, its light steady and bright. Somewhere in there, a new security guard was doing their rounds, watching for threats, protecting what mattered. "Thinking about your old life?" Dana appeared at his elbow, holding 2 glasses of champagne and offering him one. "Thinking about how close I came to losing everything." Joseph accepted the glass. "If Silas had processed that termination paperwork on time, my badge wouldn't have worked. If Marcus had called the cops instead of listening to me. If Jean had been just another stranger I walked past." "But you didn't walk past." Dana clinked her glass against his. "That's the thing about good men, Patterson. You can beat them down, steal their jobs, destroy their reputations. But you can't make them walk past someone who needs help. It's hardwired in your DNA. Is that your professional security assessment?" "That's my assessment as someone who spent 6 months watching people who've been bribed, blackmailed, or bought." Dana's smile was sharp. "You were the only guard in that building who couldn't be corrupted because you never forgot what it was like to need help. Richard and Silas never understood that. They thought everyone had a price. Everyone does have a price." Joseph watched Lily and Jean through the ballroom windows, dancing to music he couldn't hear. Mine just wasn't money. Inside, Gene was giving a speech about resilience and redemption and the importance of building companies that valued character over compliance. The crowd applauded at the right moments, but Joseph knew most of them were just relieved the scandal hadn't tanked their stock portfolios. That was fine. They didn't need to understand what had really happened that night in the rain. Some truths were meant for the people who lived them. Later, after the speeches and toasts, after Lily had fallen asleep in the car and been carried into their new home, a 3-bedroom house with a yard in a school district that didn't require metal detectors, Joseph found himself in the kitchen with Jean, washing champagne flutes because it felt more real than the party had. "Do you ever regret it?" Jean asked quietly. "That night, you gave me your last $20. You could have bought Lily's inhaler instead." "I pawned my watch the next day for the inhaler money." Joseph set down the dish towel and pulled Jean close, breathing in the scent of her shampoo and the faint smell of Lily's wildflowers that had transferred from her dress. "But no, I don't regret it. Mr. Chen taught me that dignity compounds like interest. Every time you choose to see someone's humanity, you're investing in a future where yours matters too." Mr. Chen sounds like a wise man. He was a security guard who bought dinner for a stupid kid sleeping in his car. Joseph kissed her forehead. "He told me I could either be bitter about the system or be the person who broke it by refusing to play by its rules. I think he liked knowing that $20 turned into this. 6 Ferraris and a marriage proposal? A family. The Ferraris are just transportation." Jean laughed, the sound rich and full. "I love you, Joseph Patterson. You're either the most naive optimist I've ever met or the only person who actually understands how the world should work. Can't I be both?" They stood in the kitchen of their new home. Two people who'd survived different kinds of disasters and found each other in the wreckage. Outside, the city hummed with its usual chaos of desperation and hope. Somewhere, a security guard was doing their rounds, watching for threats, protecting what mattered. Somewhere, a person was cold and shivering and wondering if anyone would notice. And Joseph Patterson, who'd learned from Mr. Chun that carrying compounds like interest, made a silent promise to the next person who would need help. "I see you. I won't walk past. Your dignity matters." Because that's what good men do. Especially when it costs them everything. Even when it saves everyone. So here's the real question. Did you subscribe yet? Thousands of people will listen to this story and won't subscribe. Please don't be that person. Kindly support what I do here by subscribing. And then drop in the comment section if you like part 2 of Joseph, Jean, and Lily's story. What challenges will they face as a new blended family? How will they navigate the corporate world together? Will Richard and Silas's allies strike back from prison? Does Joseph's past hold more secrets that could threaten their newfound happiness? Let me know if you want to hear more.